Contact Report 215 Translation.
That is clear and plain. But now I would like to direct you specifically towards the future. You promised me that you would bring me material from the prophecies of Henoch for the third millennium, or that you would give me various prophecies.
Of course, I will keep my promise, but before I give you a clear account of the prophecies of Henoch, I would like to point out that prophecies are always changeable and can be changed for the better if human beings make positive changes in their thoughts, feelings and actions, leading to that which is better and positively progressive. Prophecies always rest upon specific cause. These again result in certain effects, whereby these effects can be changed at any time if only the preceding causes are changed in their form. Therefore, it is possible that negative or evil prophecies do not have to be fulfilled if the preceding causes will be purposely changed in a manner that positivity and good develop out of them instead of negativity and evil. However, this does not apply to predictions, as these rest upon events that cannot be changed or inevitable and surely and definitely will occur in the future. Predictions rest upon a preview and thus on a direct viewing of the future, and have to do with neither prophecy nor with a calculation of probability. So when I make a portion of Henoch's prophecies for the third millennium known to you, it does not mean that they have to be fulfilled, because the prerequisite of fulfillment in each case would be that the already existing causes continue to exist as also continue to be created in the future so that a fulfillment of the prophecies can come to pass. Thus, the possibility always exists, always provided that the human being of the earth becomes reasonable, that through a reasonable change of thinking, as well as through a reasonable development in feeling and an equally reasonable conduct, everything changes for the good, better and positive, whereby the prophecies do not have to fulfill themselves. However, if this transformation does not occur, a very evil, wicked, and negative time lies ahead for the earth and its entire population in the coming new millennium.
Since the Second World War, the thoughts, feelings, and actions of the human being of the earth have changed much towards the positive and good, but all that achieved is not enough in my opinion, as the great transformation towards the better has not been achieved yet, neither by the mighty of this world nor all of humankind of the earth itself. In the years gone by you have made many predictions and calculations of probability, as well as mentioned prophetic facts concerning the economic, military, and political situation on earth, whereby I was requested to spread this information, which I indeed have done. Governments and newspapers, radio stations, as well as stations and many private persons worldwide were informed by me. But the entire effort did not achieve anything, because up till now humankind has carried on in the old manner and has paid no attention whatsoever to prophecies, predictions and calculations of probability. And the same will most likely be the case in the future, when I receive permission from you in the coming time to spread the prophecies of Henoch for the third millennium. But nevertheless, I feel that Henoch's message for the future must be made known and distributed, because somehow it may yet bear fruit.
You apparently never give up hope. Your optimism is honorable and deserves to be heard by human beings, but the manner in which things have been going throughout this century, there is not too much hope that the human beings of the earth will come to their senses and heed your words. This will then be the case only when the prophecies prove to be true, or, even worse, have already come to pass. Probably only then will the time come when the defamations against you will end in regard to your contacts with us, although they will long continue to be vehemently disputed by your enemies as well as by pathological know-it-alls and critics who dismiss them as swindle, lies and fraud. The full truth about our contacts with you will be proven in the distant future, and then humankind will accept our help which we offer through you, even when they erroneously assume we come from the seven-star system known to the earth humans as the seven stars, seven sisters / plays.
Semjase and Ptaah already explained this to me. But tell us now what the new millennium will bring to human beings of the earth and the planet Earth according to the prophecies of Henoch.
I will do that in a moment, but I would like to explain before beginning that I am not authorized to give an exact indication of years in an official manner.
Understood, but that is certainly a good thing. But I would be grateful to you if you could present the prophecies in a modern, somewhat understandable language for the better understanding of the human beings. The old manner of writing and speaking of Henoch might be incomprehensible to most of today's Earth humans. This also means that a straightforward language and presentation is desirable, precisely that the prophecies should not be given in riddles and mysteries, for if I have to publish everything, then open, explanatory, and unencrypted prophecies should be of value, because I think that only understandable prophecies can be of use, since through encryption the interest of the human beings fades, for they can understand precisely nothing. My experience proves to me that human beings are much more responsive and will strive for a matter in more detail and with more interest if something is clearly and distinctly explained to them. Although it is true that through the encryptions of prophecies and so on, some anxiety is reduced, this will only become greater as less is understood, for then world fantasies begin to act and to agitate, by which means hellish anxieties and hellish pictures emerge.
Your words are of correctness. Thus, I will offer Henoch's prophecies in an understandable form. So listen, then, if the human being of the earth continues to live in the same style as they have done up to now, forming their thoughts and feelings in the same manner, indulging in the same actions as they have done hitherto, then the words of the prophecies of Henoch could not be any clearer. The point in time at which these prophecies will begin to be fulfilled will be when a pope will no longer reside in Rome. All of Europe will then fall victim to a terrible punishment by evil powers. The Christian religion will collapse and the churches and monasteries will end up in ruins and ashes. Monstrous forces will be created by sins and will be released by the military forces and armies, as well as by terrorists, causing great destruction. Millions and even billions of human beings will be killed by acts of terrorism, by wars and civil wars. And finally, in some parts of the world, every third human being, and in other places every fourth human being, will lose his or her life. The nations of the East will rise against the nations of the West against the East. Many deaths will be inflicted upon the human beings by fighter and bomber aircraft, and bombs and rockets will destroy and annihilate smaller and larger villages and cities. The human beings will be completely powerless against all this and will live through 888 days of hell on earth, suffering hunger and plagues which will claim even more lives than the war itself. The time will be severe as never before experienced on the earth. Ultimately, nothing can be bought or sold any longer. All provisions will be rationed. And if a human being steals even a small piece of bread, he or she will have to pay for it with their life. Many waters will mix with human blood and turn red, as once in the past the Nile in Egypt turned red with blood. And it will be that the fanatics of Islam will rise up against the countries of Europe, and all will shake and quiver. Everything in the West will be destroyed. England will be conquered and thrown down to the lowest level of misery. And the fanatics and warriors of Islam will retain their power for a long time. However, not only Europe will be affected, but ultimately all the countries and human beings of the earth, as the great horror expands to a war that will encompass the entire world. After the turn of the millennium, the papacy will exist for only a short period. Pope John Paul I is the third from last in this position. After him, only one additional pontificate will follow. Then a Pontifex Maximus follows, who will be known as Petrus Romanus. Under his religious rule, the end of the Catholic Church will come, a total collapse becoming inevitable. That will be the beginning of the worst catastrophe that will ever have befallen the human beings and the earth. Many Catholic clerics, priests, bishops, cardinals and many others will be killed, and their blood will flow in streams. But also the Reformed version of Christianity will become just as infinitely small as does Catholicism. Due to the fault of scientists, enormous power will be seized by the power-hungry, and their military, their warriors and terrorists, and power will be seized as well through lesser weapons of many types, but also via atomic, chemical and biological weapons. Also concerning genetic technology, enormous misuse will occur, because this will be unrestrainedly exploited for the purposes of war, not lastly due to the cloning of human beings for warring purposes, as this was practiced in ancient times with the descendants of Henoch in the regions of Syria. However, this will not be all of the horrors, as in addition to the genetic technology and the chemical weapons, far worse and more dangerous and more deadly weapons of mass destruction will be produced and will be used. The irresponsible politicians will unscrupulously exercise their power, assisted by scientists and obedient military forces serving them, who together hold a deadly scepter and will create clone-like beings which will be bred in a total lack of conscience and will be scientifically manipulated to become killer machines. Division by division and devoid of any feelings, they will destroy, murder and annihilate everything. The United States of America will set out against the eastern countries ahead of all other financial states, and simultaneously she will have to defend herself against the eastern intruders. In all, America will play the most decisive role when, in the guise to strive for peace and to fight against terrorism, she invades many countries of the earth, bombs and destroys everything and brings thousandfold deaths to the populations. The military politics of the United States of America will likewise know no limits, as neither will their economic and other political institutions, which will be focused on building and operating a world police force, as it is the case already for a long time. But that will not be enough, because under the guise of a so-called peaceful globalization, American politics will strive for absolute world domination of economic form. And this will point towards the possibility that a third world war could develop from it, if the human beings as a whole will not finally become bearers of rationality and undertake the necessary steps against the insane machinations of their governments and military powers as well as their secret services, and call a halt to the power of the irresponsible who have forsaken their responsibility in all areas. If this does not happen, many small and great nations will lose their independence and their cultural identity and will be beaten down, because the United States of America will gain predominance over them and bring them down under her rule with evil force. At first, many countries will howl with the wolves of the us, partially due to fear of American aggressions and sanctions, as will be the case with many irresponsible ones in Switzerland and Germany, but also of other countries. In part, others will join in because they will be forced somehow to do so, or will be misled by irresponsible promoters of American propaganda. Finally, many Asian, African and European states will rise up against the American hegemony once they recognize that the United States of America is only taking advantage of them for purposes of war, conquest and exploitation. In this manner, many countries will become puppet states of America before rationality and cognition will emerge in the responsible ones of governments and in many of the population, resulting in a turning away from the United States of America. However, the Great War will hardly be avoidable, because the human beings of the earth will probably not accept the directions towards the better therewith, towards true love, true freedom and real peace, striving instead only towards wealth, pleasure and riches, and for all manner of material values and unrestricted power. Thus, huge and deadly formations of tanks will roll across the countries while fighter planes and rockets sweep through the air and bring death, ruin, destruction and annihilation to countries and human beings. And the bad time will come during which also the militaries and armies will cause out of control great wild and evil devastations and unimaginable massacres of the human beings who will be forced to watch the wild activities powerlessly. Your and our warnings will be cast into the wind by the majority of Earth humanity, even though quite a bit could still be saved and the very worst could be prevented, if your and our words of love, peace, freedom and wisdom would be acted upon. But even that, unfortunately, is doubtful. If the Third World War will actually happen, as calculations and observations appear to indicate to be probable now and also during the approaching few decades, then as now, the civilian population will above all have to bear the brunt of the enormous suffering in tremendous numbers in this entire catastrophe, and last but not least, the fault of the irresponsible scientists who by cloning will create human machines for military purposes, devoid of conscience and feelings, and will create immensely deadly and all-annihilating computer-like weapons. At the same time, the danger could become reality that the human combat machines, the military clones, will gain their independence and under their own management will bring death, devastation, destruction and annihilation to the human beings of the earth and to the planet. The entire planet will become an urn of unparalleled suffering which will never have existed before on the earth up to that time. The cruel happenings will last about 888 days and cause civilization to collapse. Yet, the terrible scenario will continue, and epidemics and various diseases, as well as enormous famine, will be spread among the human beings, while the economy of the world will totally collapse, and there will be no possibility to produce any goods. Needless to say, all foods and medications, and so on will be rationed, and anyone who lays their hands on these goods will be put to death. The insanity of war will extend, not only across the land, but the disaster will equally be spread to the oceans, into the atmosphere, even into outer space. But there will also be settlements under the ocean that will be developed in the course of the future, and these will be attacked and destroyed, claiming the lives of many thousands of human beings. However, a certain maelstrom of destruction will also originate from the undersea facilities. Because in the cities at the bottom of the ocean, groups of submarine pirates will be formed which will burst upwards from the depths of the ocean and will become involved in destructive actions of combat with naval units on the surface. And at this time, the possibility could become reality that extraterrestrial forces intervene against the Western industrialist countries, because these will be responsible for the extreme and enormous disaster of the coming evil times. These extraterrestrial forces will give up their anonymity and their state of secrecy and will assist those who are being terrorized by the irresponsibly acting Western countries should this possibility become reality. In addition, apocalyptic natural catastrophes will occur which will cause all of Europe to shake and tremble. But Europe will continue to exist even after having suffered enormous destruction. For in the West it will be different. The United States of America will be a country of total destruction. The cause for this will be manifold. With her global conflicts which are continuously instigated by her and which will continue far into the future, America is creating enormous hatred against her, worldwide in many countries. As a result, America will experience enormous catastrophes which will reach proportions barely imaginable to the human beings of the earth. The destruction of the world, that is to say, the World Trade Center, by terrorists will only be the beginning. Yet all the apocalyptic events will not only be brought about due to the use of unbelievably deadly and destructive weapons such as chemical, laser and others, and by cloned murder machines. But in addition to this, the earth and nature, maltreated to the deepest depths by the irresponsible human beings of the earth, will rise up and cause destruction and bring death onto the earth. Enormous firestorms and gigantic hurricanes will sweep over the United States of America, bringing devastation, destruction and annihilation as will never have happened before in living memory. Not only will America, but also all other Western industrial countries which still live at the beginning of the new millennium in the delusion that they could dominate and rule over underdeveloped nations, that is to say, third world countries, not only soon lose influence over these, but must defend themselves against them. According to the prophecies of Henoch, the truth about industrialized countries is that they only seem to appear to be true civilizations, but in fact they are not. Because more and more, at the end of the 20th century and at the beginning of the third millennium, they will disregard all true love, true freedom, and true wisdom, as well as true peace, along with all values of humaneness and of being true humans. But not even all the terrible happenings will hinder the United States of America in continuing to proceed with its actions against all countries. Even when the North American continent will be stricken by the most terrible catastrophe which has ever been recorded, even military powers will wreak havoc with computerized and nuclear, biological and chemical weapons, whereby it will also happen that computerized weapons become independent and cannot be controlled any longer by human beings. Overall, this is the most important part of Henoch's prophecies.
But there is still more to explain if I may ask you for it. At least that is what you told me.
You are untiring. So I will point out a few more important facts of the prophecies. As of now, new epidemics have spread among the human beings of the earth. However, as Henoch prophesied, quite a number of further epidemics will follow. Not only AIDS will occur worldwide in the 1990s, but also epidemics such as the so-called mad cow disease, that is to say, out of which different strains of Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome will develop, lasting well into the new millennium. Also, an epidemic known as Ebola will cause many deaths, as well as other unknown epidemics and diseases which will sporadically arise in epidemic proportions, and will be new to the human being, causing great concern. However, most of the evil will be brought about by politics. France and Spain become involved with each other in armed conflicts, and even before World War III will have broken out. Yet France will not only engage in armed conflicts with Spain, for within her great unrests will arise, leading to upheavals and civil war, or as in Russia and Sweden, great unrest will arise there in its own country as well, bringing about upheavals and civil war. Especially in France and Sweden, machinations as well as dictatorial regulations of the European Union will cause much unrest and many uprisings. But also crimes committed by gangs and organized criminal elements in these countries will cause unavoidable civil wars. In addition, significant tensions will arise between the native citizens and immigrants from foreign countries who as a rule also observe religious beliefs different from those of the native populace. And in the end, this will lead to severe conflicts. Hatred against strangers, foreigners and human beings of different religious beliefs will be the order of the day, as well as the rise of neo-Nazism, terrorism and right-wing extremism. Conditions similar to civil war will be in England, Wales and Northern Ireland and claim many lives. The Soviet Union will be dissolved in this decade or at the latest by the beginning of the next. The man decisive for this action will be Mikhail Gorbachev. But this will not lead to rest, because the new Russia will continue its long-standing conflict with China over Inner Mongolia, with the result that Russia will lose a portion of this territory to China. And China becomes dangerous, especially to India, as also at this time China maintains uneasy relations with her. China will attack India. And if biological weapons are used, around 30 million human beings will be killed in the area of and around New Delhi alone. However, this will not be the end yet, because the effect of biological bombs and missiles and so on that will be used cannot be controlled in their outcomes at that time, and terrible epidemics, unknown up to that point in time, will arise and will spread quickly to many areas. Also, Pakistan will allow herself to be missiled to instigate a war against India, which will be especially dangerous in view of the fact that both countries are developing atomic weapons. Yet Russia will not rest and will attack Scandinavia, and in doing so will embroil all of Europe. And months before that, a terrible tornado will have swept across northern Europe, causing great devastation and destruction. It must still be stated that the Russian attack will occur during the summer, in fact, starting from Archangels. Denmark will not be dragged into the war, due to the insignificance of this country. Yet Russia will not be satisfied with this action of war, as her will for expansion will be ravenous. And consequently Russia will launch a military attack against Iran and Turkey, and will conquer these two countries in bloody fighting, causing enormous destruction. And short in the Russian will to expand will also be the will of theirs to annex the oil deposits in the Middle East, as well as to get into the direct area of southeastern Europe, which is why they are also advancing into the Balkans and mercilessly and devastatingly beating the countries therein. Huge battles with many deaths and destruction. This will be at the time that tremendous natural disasters will hit Italy and its human beings, causing severe hardship. But this will also be at the time when Vesuvius could become active again and could spread tremendous havoc. At the same time, a war will shake Italy and claim many human lives, as well as cause great destruction. Destruction of war will also descend on the northern countries, as strong military forces will invade them from the east and will pillage and murder, as well as use bombs and missiles, like hail coming down, and hitherto unknown weapons of laser and computer-controlled types, which will destroy and annihilate everything, whereby the first target will be Hungary, and after that will follow Austria and northern Italy. Switzerland will also be severely affected, but will not be the actual target. This will be France and Spain. However, the main objective of the aggressors will be to bring all of Europe under their military control, and for that purpose France will be selected to be the headquarters. France will not only be invaded by the aggressors from the outside, but will also be conquered from within as a result of collaborative forces and other forces. This can be envisioned as being the many foreigners of a different religion living in France at that time, and specifically Islam, which will be this force working from within. Once France has fallen, a war to conquer Spain and England will take place. Subsequently, an alliance with the forces of the aggressors will be formed, which will invade Scandinavia. For all these French-based military operations, the weapons of mass destruction stored in the arsenals of France will be used and cause evil devastation, destruction and annihilation. The aggressors from the east will force the French army to join their military forces and lead a war of conquest against the northern countries of Europe, invading and conquering Sweden and Norway. Subsequently, these northern countries will be annexed by Russia. Military forces will also attack Finland, whereby many will be killed and an enormous destruction will be caused, after which the complete dissolution of the country will occur and the Russian forces will settle in it for a very long time. This then will also be the time during which the German citizenship will even fight in a civil war and at the same time attack a large army from East Germany. But the country and its population will be able to free themselves from the yoke of the aggressors again. It's just that they will still fall into the hands of the invading military forces. After a certain time then, the nations will rise up against the aggressors and intruders. Therefore, a European-wide liberation struggle will break out. At the same time as a civil war rages in Germany, an enormously bloody revolution will break out in England, which will claim more lives than will be claimed by the civil war in Germany. And because England and Ireland have been at war for a long time already, due to the IRA and the police and military forces of England, the result will be, because this feud will continue up to that time, that this revolution will spread out to all of Ireland, especially affecting Northern Ireland. Many lives will be lost during a civil war in Wales, where differences between various parties will arise before the Third World War. Welsh and English forces will clash, especially near Cymru, and claim many lives and cause great destruction. But death, destruction and annihilation will not only rage in Europe, for America will also have to endure much suffering and mourn many deaths as well as destruction and annihilation. America and Russia will have the most terrible weapons of mass destruction at their disposal, which indeed is already the case to a certain extent today, and will clash with violent force against each other at that time of conflict, whereby Canada will also be dragged into this conflict. The source of this conflict will substantiate the Russian attack on the American state of Alaska and against Canada. This conflict will result in mass killings of human beings as well as devastating destruction, annihilation and epidemics and so on, which mankind of Earth will never have seen and experienced up to that time. Not only nuclear, biological and chemical weapons will be used en masse, but also enormously deadly systems of computer-controlled weapons that are only in the beginning stages of development today or will be invented and constructed during the third millennium. As already mentioned, enormous natural catastrophes and rolling walls of fire and violent hurricanes will rage all across America, while in addition, all the terrible effects of war will bring thousandfold deaths, destruction and annihilation. America's largest cities will be absolutely destroyed, and firestorms will cause great disaster and misery. Several earthquakes and volcanic eruptions will also belong to that time, and these will cause much suffering and misery and deaths, besides enormous destruction and devastation, as all of nature and the planet itself will rise up against the insanity of the human beings on the earth. However, tornadoes, earthquakes and volcanic eruptions will not only rage in America, but also in Europe and in the rest of the world. These activities have already begun at the present time, and also during the past decades only. They will become increasingly more devastating in the coming time. And today, as in the future, it is largely the fault of the Earth's human beings who are destroying the entire environment. The nature, the atmosphere, the waters and the planet's resources. And through this, a shifting of weight inside the Earth takes place, caused, for example, by the creation of gigantic lakes through damming and by creating hollow caverns due to the exploitation of petroleum and gas, and so on, and thereby unnatural inner Earth movements are created, which also lead to unnatural tectonic effects and cause earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, which also in turn cause enormous climatic changes, resulting in horrendous tornadoes of devastating proportions, which in the end will set their destructive energies free on the entire world. All of this will lead to increasingly horrible floods and unusually massive snowfalls, which will advance to the southern countries and finally even to the equatorial regions, because through the insanity of human beings the Earth has imperceptibly begun to spin as a result of the atomic bomb explosions within and on the Earth. And this will be the reason that the planet will slowly but surely enter an extraordinary spinning orbit around the Sun, while the first phase is already occurring, which causes a change in climate, leading to a new ice age. Yet the misery on the Earth will continue, as two terrible civil wars will break out in America, where one will follow the other. Afterwards, the United States of America will break apart and deadly hostility will prevail among her, which then leads to the division into 5 different territories. And it cannot be prevented that sectarian fanatics will play a dictatorial role. Anarchy will be the worldwide condition that will prevail and torment human beings over a long period of time, as human beings will also be tormented by the many epidemics and diseases, many of them new and unknown to human beings and for this reason incurable. Due to this fact, the bodies of many human beings will slowly and miserably decay, while unbearable pain will also occur, as well as blindness and terrible respiratory problems that led to suffocation. The consciousness of many human beings will become impaired and succumb to feeble-mindedness and insanity. And all these gruesome occurrences will be traceable to biological and chemical weapons, which are the cause of not fast but gruesome and slow deaths. And this will also occur due to the use of ray and frequency weapons, which are already being developed today. Finally, the words of Henoch may be specifically mentioned, which include that humankind of the Earth, in pursuit of technology for mass destruction and greed for power, hatred, vengeance and riches, will flout all values of creation and will trample upon all values of love, wisdom, freedom and peace, as ancestors of the Henoch lineage have done before, to plunge the world into screaming misery, death, destruction and annihilation, and into the most severe catastrophes humankind of the Earth will ever have experienced.
Those are, however, still not all the prophecies of Henoch.
That is correct. The given explanations should suffice, however.
There you are actually right. But tell me what is actually going on now with what you told me about the building of the pyramids, namely that human powers, respectively human muscle power, had accomplished the building of the pyramids. Years ago I was told that telekinetic forces had been in play, by which means the large cubes should have been moved through the air by thought, respectively consciousness powers, which are and have always been mistakenly referred to as mental powers. But now you have said something else. How does that reconcile itself?
My recently given explanation is just as correct as that which you were given a few years ago. Both recently as well as before, you only asked for a certain explanation, but not for one that should be complete. So now, however, I will explain to you that both human muscle power, which accomplished most of the work, as well as telekinetic powers were used in the building of the pyramids. The human muscle power was used by the human beings of the earth, who worked on the building, while the telekinetic powers were used by the foreigners from the star systems Orion and Leo, and of these foreigners, however, only a few had powerful telekinetic powers. Thus, only small works were settled in this manner.
Thus misunderstandings arise.
Exact answers always trace back to an exact specifying of the questions.
Of course, then, a clear question several times. I have already determined that your knowledge is very comprehensive with regard to spiritual and creational interests. To what extent do you occupy yourself therewith?
Also, nothing remains hidden to you. My efforts are directed towards acquiring the level of an Ishwish.
Oh no, and you first say that now, after we have already known each other for so long.
You never asked about it.
Well, Road Lion. You are right, yes, because you only explain things about yourself if I ask for them. I should actually do that myself.
That you also do, yes. Well, I think that I must constantly strive very much if I want to learn something about you. Since you only rarely tell me something about yourself, as you also do so with the group members, I must always do my best to get to know something about you that is otherwise necessary for me.
Then we are both just sick in the same hospital, if you know what I mean.
This saying is known to me from you, yes. But now, my friend, I should say goodbye again, for I am already here for nearly too long, and I still have important things to do.
As you wish. Please greet everyone quite sincerely for me, and please convey to Semjase my best wishes. So go then, and farewell. Until we meet again.
Until we meet again, my friend.
One more moment please, my friend. As you were mentioning Henoch's prophecy, the question went through my head as to why actually also Switzerland will come to the checkout, respectively will be overrun by foreign war powers. Is there a particular reason for this? As a neutral state, our country should be respected and should remain spared from acts of war.
If Switzerland would actually remain neutral, then it would also be spared from acts of war. Through many irresponsible ones of the human beings and the government, the land of peace, as it was called in the yearly prophecies, will lose its true neutrality despite contrary statements and promises of the irresponsible ones. The fact will be that these irresponsible ones, for which they already prepare and strive today, will form connections with the UN and NATO, as well as with the forthcoming European Union, whereby the true neutrality of Switzerland will be destroyed, and indeed against all contrary assertions of the responsible governments and the misled population, as I already explained to you. Through the UN and NATO, Switzerland, and also the citizens will be drawn into acts of war. Although the UN should be of a purely peaceful nature, that will not remain so, because it will be inevitable in the new millennium that also the UN forces will take up arms. Even though it will only be for defense in some circumstances, it still means acts of war, through which death will hold a rich harvest even in the ranks of the UN forces. Nevertheless, that will not be everything, for the idea of creating a European Union has already arisen in various high leaders of Europe, through which the human beings who will comprise it will be greatly limited in their freedom, as well as the various provincial governments that will sell off their countries entrusted to them to this European Union, which will exhibit very strong dictatorial tendencies. Brussels in Belgium will become the governmental center for this union, and the responsible persons there will acquire tremendous compensations, which will have to be paid by the countries belonging to the union and their populations. They will call these compensations fair remuneration, for which the citizens of all union member countries will have to perform hard work by the sweat of their brows. Through these, the leaders of the European Union will be able to live in the lap of luxury at the expense of the citizens, and will be able to laugh at the stupidity of their advocates. The rulers of the individual countries, as well as those of the European Union in Brussels, will gradually take it so far, even to the point where they will want to sue and punish their rejectors, complainants, and critics. And the doings of the European Union will ultimately be the decisive reason for the fact that from the east military forces will invade Europe and will subjugate and destroy everything if the entire population of Europe and their governments do not rationally work against everything, so that the threatening prophecies do not fulfill themselves.
When should these connections with the planned European Union come about, then, I mean with regard to Switzerland?
The beginnings for this will already be established by the leaders of the government of Switzerland in the coming 90s, but the actual connections will not come about until the next millennium. The irrationality of both the government and the majority of the Swiss folks will, unfortunately, be more powerful than their reason. And through this, all roads will be paved for the autonomy of the government, by which means the catastrophe will ultimately break out over Switzerland if the country's citizens still do not become sensible and do not counteract the machinations that lead to slavery and war. The human beings in the European countries, and with these also those in Switzerland, still have time to prevent everything and to turn to the better, but it is doubtful as to whether their reason will triumph, and whether they will prevent the imminent evil thereby, for this is still possible during the next few years, but after this it will then become too late very quickly.
Reason is to be hoped for, but such hope will probably be pointless, I think.
As things are looking, you will probably be right. Unfortunately,
it would be right to me if you would still say a few important things, and if you would mention some aspects that are important for the Earth humans.
I can do that, yes. However, this requires that I inform someone about my extended absence. Wait a moment, yes, it's okay, I can postpone my task. Quetzal spoke in a language unfamiliar to me over his communication device with a female person who is likewise unknown to me. What should I speak of now?
Let us hear something in the sense of what you extraterrestrials have to tell us Earth humans in general regarding behavior and development, love, knowledge and wisdom, as well as regarding peace and truth and so on. In your kind, you are all very highly developed and extremely loving beings who have overcome all acts of violence and who wish that we sorry Earth, the worms, would also free ourselves from the illogical violence. In this context, I think that it would be appropriate for you to say a few words.
There is a lot that can and must be addressed, and I would like to list that which I have to say as follows. 333. 1. For the Earth humans, we wish that they in all love and reason tend toward bringing an end to all aggression, acts of violence and wars, as well as all criminality, all hate, all discord, every bondage, as well as any craving for vengeance and retaliation. 334. 2. In order that correct justice and humanity, as well as true reverence for life, can prevail, it is our desire that in all countries worldwide, torture as well as the death penalty be abolished and laws are enacted, where every life and the right to soundness of the body and psyche are respected and placed under legal protection. 335 We wish that a normal level of population and births be strived for on Earth, and in this regard, effective worldwide birth control be enforced. Because only through this can too excessive and overpopulation be avoided, and even further privation, criminality, hate against a fellow humans, wars, exploitation of the Earth's resources to the utmost, as well as new diseases, epidemics and misery be avoided and contained. 336 For a means of food production should be strived for on the earth among all human beings, and these goods should be distributed in such a manner that the misery of hunger no longer develops, and therefore all human beings have enough food. 337 5 The earth human should no longer be destructive in all areas of science and in the cultivation of land and forests, as well as water utilization, and so on, but rather be constructive and progressive. 338 This also refers to the preservation of a healthy atmosphere and ever more threatening climatic change, with reference to that which originates through human fault. 339 6 The earth humans should consciously unfold in the forms of love and knowledge, as well as in true humanity, and recognize the creation, even evolution, as the highest goal and meaning of life. 347 The earth humans should utilize their science in such a manner that true positive progress develops in every respect. 341 The cognition, knowledge, experience, as well as wisdom should grow within earth humans in order to know that they are not the only human life forms in the entire universe, and are, furthermore, but a fraction of the whole within the universe. 342 9 True peace as well as true love and freedom should finally prevail on earth and among all human beings, regardless of skin color, race and faith, without hate, revenge, jealousy, craving for retaliation, privation, misery, murder, homicide, terror and wars. 343 10 It should come to an end that the countries of the earth, even the poorest and most underdeveloped among them, maintain armies that are armed to the teeth and senselessly burn away innumerable sums of money in the billions, which could and should be used for the true well-being of the human beings. 344 Thus it should finally cease that politicians and the military, as well as the most diverse organizations everywhere in the world, talk about peace and freedom, love and humanity in order to justify tremendous financial expenditures on the one hand, and on the other hand to snatch up even more of these funds for purposes of war and terror, and to heat up the weapons industry so that further acts of terrorism and war can be carried out with the new weapons. 345 11 It must finally come to an end on earth that human beings with other forms of conviction as well as different faiths, skin color and race are hated, pursued, tortured and killed. 346 12 It must come to an end that umpteen thousand tons of food are criminally destroyed on a daily basis for reasons of profit, or due to low market prices they are simply thrown into rivers, fit to livestock or left to rot away. Food which would spare millions of human beings from a death by starvation, in particular women and children, who are the ones bearing the most misery in this regard. 347 13 It must come to an end that the earth humans, as a whole, face all their enormous problems helplessly and powerlessly, because all the profit-greedy, irresponsible and unscrupulous ones are able to conduct their criminal affairs unrestrainedly without being held accountable for them, as are also the governmental persons of responsibility who are incapable of administering their office within the framework of a just and appropriate leadership in order to resolve the mounting problems. 348 14 Most urgently, the earth human must learn to bear their own responsibility and consciously act in a progressive manner in accordance with this. 349 It can no longer persist that the responsibility is simply shifted onto someone or something else, because the individual is responsible for all of his or her own thinking, feelings and actions. 350 The individual must recognize and adhere to his or her responsibility, because only when the individual begins recognition of their responsibility and adheres to their responsibility will the next person be prompted to do the same, whereby others in turn will join in, and finally the whole of the earth's humankind will be taken up by it. 351.15 If the individual person has the need to actively do something to change the world, its human beings in particular, this actually is within his or her power, but only in such a manner that they be an example to their fellow human beings. 352 Thus every person has it within him or herself to begin a change for the better toward peace, love, freedom, progress, as well as toward knowledge and wisdom. 353 Everyone must make a start by himself or herself and also discover the way to a free and happy life on their own. 354 Each human being must first acquire an optimistic attitude solely for themselves, and from this will initially result the progress of expansion, through which their fellow humans will be prompted and will join in. 355 And if the human beings think consciously in this direction, then they will make the amazing discovery that all means and all hopes for a true progress exist only when they start everything by themselves. 356.16 The human being must recognize, discover and experience in detail, through his or her own cognition, what their true innermost being is, and how it relates to the external personality. 357.17 Unfortunately, the earth humans have generally assigned top ranks or top status to political, economic, scientific, military, material and financial values. 358 These, however, are on values that bring tremendous damage, through which the well-being in physical and psychological aspects is impaired, as well as the consciousness-related development of the individual, and even of the whole of humankind. 359 As a result, the true sages and philosophers have vanished, making room for the wannabes with respect to wisdom and philosophy who frequently inundate the world and humankind with horrendous nonsense that has nothing to do with reality, correctness and conformity to laws of the spiritual energies and the creation. 360 All of these unvalues must be removed in order to place the true sages back in their proper place in society. 361 The opportunity must be provided for these few who are presently on earth to emerge from their hidden solitude so that they can instruct the human beings. 362 In so doing, however, all those must be pushed into the background who spread unreasonable sectarian teachings and principles, through which earth humans have been pushed away from the real truth and have been misled. 363.18 The earth human must learn not to solely pursue materialism and money from birth until death, and hence they should not listen just to those who have amassed political or military power or an immense fortune. 364 And so they should neither aspire after them nor try to be like them, and devote neither their time, their work and efforts nor their initiative and lives to them as well. 365 If the human beings nevertheless do this, then they forfeit their evolution, and thus the meaning of their existence. 366 And if they do not lose their life in a direct manner, then they make themselves dependent on the rulers of a political, dictatorial, military, or materially wealthy form, shouting approval and support for them and becoming those who live an appearance illusion instead of those who truly live are. 367.19 The earth human must free himself or herself from the variety of political, dictatorial, military, scientific and faith-oriented directions, as this alone guarantees, on the one hand, the discovery and following of the path of the creational truth and its laws and recommendations, as well as, on the other hand, a loving, peaceful, liberated, wise and harmonious functioning of the individuals and the entire community of humankind. 368 Truthfully, no movement of a political, military, economical, scientific, philosophical and faith-oriented form should be allowed to dominate over another. 369 However, if such domination exists, then revelries, hate, racism, faith and political struggles, as well as discord, lack of freedom, unkindness, ignorance, and many further values develop which lead to destruction, murder and manslaughter in addition to warlike actions and falsehood. 370 The earth human must change toward the good and positive through their own reason and grasp of responsibility, and thereby rehabilitate themselves. 371 Thus he or she must establish their own dimension and free themselves from their self-demeaning service toward all their shortcomings and their false hopes and desires. 372 The earth human considers that he or she will live new lives over and over again in striving for that which is higher in accordance with the creational laws and recommendations through many new personalities in reincarnation of the spirit form and the overall consciousness block, namely in the obligation of a creational path that he or she consciously develops in every logical, good and positive form. 373 But this means that every person must strive for his or her advancement through every personal responsibility, and society must also make that possible for them. 374 It is correct that each one takes the trouble to perform the required work for which they will be paid and which will enable them to afford housing in one form or the other, as well as in self-responsibility to bear the cost of their food and clothing, and also for their training and education and for all our pressing needs. 375 21 The earth human must learn to recognize and understand their true innermost creational being, because solely through this will it be possible for them to engage their body and above all their material consciousness and its awakening and development. 376 Thus he or she learns their own self-appreciation for their innermost being as well as their body and consciousness, and come to this realization by themselves. 377 So the recognition and conscious arousal of one's own innermost being occurs through the awakening of the material consciousness as well as true awareness of the body. These 21 important things, dear friend, should be my statements for now, which I mentioned in accordance with your wish. In another visit, I will perhaps try to continue with the statements.
My sincere thanks for your remarks. I would also like to thank you in advance that you want to address even other points in later conversations. Many thanks.
But now it must really be enough for today.
Take care, goodbye, and many thanks once again.